Fickle. Would you describe yourself as fickle? It can be an appropriate word to describe how we relate to each other as human beings. And if that weren't enough, it can describe our relationships with God from time to time too. But we'll get to that in a minute. Fickle, definition. Likely to change your opinion or your feelings very suddenly and often without any good reason. Characterized by erratic changeableness or instability, and especially with regard to affections or attachments or opinions or judgments. As I thought about it, when we are fickle, it stems out of expectations that we have. And perhaps even a feeling of entitlement, what we deserve, what we may not be getting in a particular moment. Maybe it develops in a friendship or in the workplace or at school or with a neighbor, in our families, and in the church too, in our relationships with each other. I read this quote, "Fickle people are marked by erratic change in attraction and affection. Love you or hate you, depending on if you're performing satisfactorily, of course. Are you meeting expectations? In which case you remain the next great hope. But heaven help you if you mess up." Have you experienced someone significant in your life suddenly changing in a way that affects the whole relationship? And might even affect it to the point of breaking it down completely? I've had that experience. And it hurts, doesn't it? And it possibly leaves us feeling a bit insecure, doubting ourselves, wondering, what did I do to make this happen? When in fact, maybe we didn't really do anything. There's a real sense of loss. And with that loss comes grief and sadness and maybe even anger too. But nonetheless, things are different with that particular person. Early in the 1800s, Napoleon and his army were moving through Switzerland, and everywhere they went, Napoleon was greeted with a thunderous applause. "Long live the king! Long live the king! Hail to Emperor Napoleon!" And Napoleon didn't seem to get all that excited by this. A supporter said to him, "Isn't it great to hear the roar of the crowds? Isn't it wonderful, the support of your people?" And Napoleon replied, "Well, the same people that are cheering for me today would cheer just as loudly at my execution." What Napoleon was saying is it's natural for people to become fickle. One day you're a hero, and the next day you're zero. It's amazing how fast the roar of the crowd can turn against you. Jesus, in our gospel reading for this morning, experienced how fickle people can become. The people of his hometown. They've known him since he was a child. They watched him grow up. They saw him nurtured by his parents. They marveled at his spiritual depth and his ability to open up God's word in a way that spoke to them. That was last week's gospel reading. Everyone's eyes in the temple were fixed on him. They listened intently to every word. They were riveted, taking everything in that he had to say. They wanted to hear him. But Jesus says, what is it that you really want? What do you really want from me? You want to experience for yourselves the blessings that I read about and proclaim and teach, because you think you deserve those blessings. You're entitled to them. You're a holy people, living faithfully as God's children. What you say to me, Jesus says, is do for us what you did in Capernaum. But then Jesus recalled for them who had actually received the blessings and healing in the past, as recorded in their Hebrew scriptures. Not the ones who expected it. Not the ones who felt entitled to it or deserving. It wasn't all the lepers and all the widows. It was the one that God sent the prophets Elijah and Elisha to. What Jesus was saying to them is, you may expect those blessings to come upon you because you deserve them. or because you feel entitled to them. And yet it might not be so. And what was the reaction of the crowd? They became angry with him. The same folk who were hanging on his every word threw him out, banished him from the village, took him to the mountaintop cliff at the edge of the village, and were ready to throw him off. Sounds to me like a fickle people, don't you think? And they weren't the first. Think about the Israelites. After their release from exile, God sends them Moses to lead them out of this slavery into a new promised land. And what were they feeling at first? Hopeful, anticipating, grateful. Yes, God, thank you for doing this for us. But did that last? They were led to a change of heart and spirit when they didn't have water to drink or bread to eat, or they felt lost in the wilderness all those years. Why has God done this to us? And then all they said is, I want to go back. Because at least there was some security in Egypt. Think about Mary when her brother Lazarus died and Jesus shows up. If you'd only been here, he wouldn't have died. Now that could be a statement of faith. If you had been here, he wouldn't have died. Or it could be, that she was placing blame on Jesus because he wasn't there and he should have been there and he should have known he needed to be there. If you had been here. Think too about the last week of Jesus' life leading to the death on the cross. How fickle his followers became as they betrayed him and denied him and ran into hiding. Why? For their own self-preservation, for their own safety, so they wouldn't be associated with him. Him? I don't know him. And then the crowds. They welcomed him into Jerusalem and proclaimed him as Messiah. They shouted, Hosanna! And yet so quickly over those next days they condemned him. They shouted, crucify him. They mocked him. Sounds pretty fickle to me. Well, what about you and me? That's where the rubber hits the road today. How fickle are we in our relationships with God? We too can be fickle from time to time. When we don't receive what we think we're entitled to or we deserve, because we're faithful people. We know our identity as disciples of Jesus Christ. It might well just be for a fleeting moment, not a complete meltdown of what we believe in or our whole faith and trust in God compromised in all that Jesus offers us in our lives. But our faith might be tested because of what's happening in our lives or we're witnessing in the world around us. Because our faith can be fragile at times, especially when we feel vulnerable and compromised, when what's happening just isn't right or just or fair. Often when we experience the untimely death of a loved one, it's easy to jump to the point of lashing out, and whether we realize it or not, we may well be lashing out at God. It's not fair. He was too young. She had so much still to give. It is not right. And those emotions that we express, those emotions are real, and they come from the depths of our souls. And because of those emotions, we may look at ourselves and to say, well, I am pretty fickle, aren't I? Easily changed, erratic, unstable, unsettled, unfocused. And when we think that about our faith, that may lead us to feel guilty. I'm not faithful enough then. My faith isn't strong enough. But the truth is, it's human nature. It's part of our DNA as human beings. And it always has been. And I think we can be too harsh on ourselves. Certainly more harsh than God is on us in those instances. God has so much more capacity. And God still loves us, and God still comforts us, and God still wants to reestablish a meaningful relationship with us, as fickle as we might be. Think about it. Jesus didn't condemn his followers when they were fickle. He still appeared to them after his resurrection and encouraged them with faith and hope that he continued to teach them. Even Thomas, put your fingers here. He didn't say, that's it, you're banished away with you. I want nothing to do with you. He said, look and see for yourself. And God didn't abandon the Israelites in the wilderness. He sent them manna from heaven. He gave them water gushing from the rock. And he did lead them home eventually to the land that he promised as their inheritance. The good news, and it is good news, is God doesn't reject us either. God doesn't turn away from us when we're fickle. God remains with us, and God is there ready, waiting for us to return back to him. And when we do, he will bless us. He will forgive us, and he will feed us. But most especially, he will love us as his children. Yes, having gone astray for a bit, but having returned to the arms of the one who wants to embrace us, who wants us to know that he's been there all along. The good news for us to hear this morning and to internalize is that when we turn away from God, when we're fickle, thankfully God is never fickle. Never. God doesn't just leave the door open for us to come back. God pursues us. God chases after us. God brings us back into that right relationship. After all, we're his beloved children. And each and every one of us, even when we go through our defiant stage, even when we go through our rebellious phase, even when we're fickle because we know best, God is that ever-loving parent who never stops loving us, never. No matter what. No matter what. What a gift that is. What a gift.